welcome to this edition of Eye on Africa here on France 24. I'm Haxi Myers-Belkin. These are the headlines. Sudan's new Prime Minister calls for the establishment of a vibrant democracy in the country after 3 decades of authoritarian rule. That following the swearing-in of Sudan's new ruling Sovereign Council. Aiming to end a months-long diplomatic dispute, the presidents of Rwanda and Uganda sign a pact in Angola that paves the way for a return to normal relations. And almost 3 years on from a deadly train derailment in Cameroon, surviving victims decry the government's proposed compensation plan. Bringing 30 years of military rule in Sudan to an end, the country has sworn in Abdalla Hamdok as Prime Minister just hours after swearing in a new sovereign council. The 11-member joint military and civilian group will be charged with ruling the country for the next 3 years, after which elections will be held. General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, who's been leading the country as the head of Sudan's Transitional Military Council, has been appointed head of state for the next 21 months. A civilian member of the new council will then take over from him. Luke Shrego has the story.
From a background figure in the Sudanese military to the leader of its Transitional Military Council, and now the head of its Joint Military-Civilian Sovereign Council. With General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan at the helm, Sudan finally seems to be moving towards democracy, having sworn in the 11-member body on Wednesday. 5 of them are army generals, the other 6 civilians, including 2 women, who'll run the country for a little over 3 years until elections are held. It comes after months of political stalemate and a brutal crackdown on protesters who wanted the military to share power after they pushed out longtime leader Omar al-Bashir in April after 4 months of demonstrations.
All the members of the Sovereign Council are accepted by us. All members have been agreed upon by either the Sudanese people, the Military Council, or the Forces of Freedom and Change. Now we can say that people are satisfied with what happened.
Despite the relief for Sudan's civilians, there have been some misgivings, particularly over the presence of Mohamed Hamdan Dagalo, a paramilitary officer blamed for the deadly repression of protests in recent months. There are also questions over just how effective the new Sovereign Council will be at tackling the nation's dire economic situation, with many demanding tangible results.
If anything happens and if we don't see anything new or things evolving, we'll surely hold another revolution and topple the council, same as we did with Omar al-Bashir.
While Burhan will head the council for nearly 2 years, a civilian leader will take over for the rest, as the group gets to grip not just with forming a full government, but a 300-seat legislative body as well.
A little earlier, I spoke to freelance journalist Naba Mohideen in Khartoum. With Sudan's new Sovereign Council dominated by civilians but led by a general, I asked her how the council's composition was being received on the streets of Khartoum.
Actually, people in the capital raised eyebrows as the generals who were directly involved in the killing of the pro-democracy protesters in June the 3rd right now are in the civilian council and actually leading the first 21 months. They are raised also eyebrows about Burhan being appointed by name, but the streets in the same time celebrating ending the turmoil that lasted for 8 months. At some point, protesters feel like this is an imposed reality as military is expected to be clinging to power, but still they think there is a chance to overcome the situation and to build the civilian transitional institution, as both sides should be binding to the constitutional draft.
And what are going to be the most urgent priorities of this new council in the coming days and weeks?
Actually, the first priority to build a strong economy with deep solution to the economic crisis that affect the country, and also to get out of the regional and international isolation being built and accumulated by former long-time Bashir's regime, and to establish also strong ties with the international community that might support building a stable and democratic country that, of course, will affect the situation in the whole Horn Africa region.
Long-simmering tensions between Uganda and Rwanda could soon be a thing of the past after the two countries' presidents signed an agreement in Angola. In the past year, mutual accusations of espionage and political assassinations culminated in Rwanda closing its border to its northern neighbour. But there are now hopes that following that meeting, people and trade will soon be able to flow between the two countries once again. Nicolas Germain from our Africa desk has more.
When Rwanda closed its border in February, it later said that Uganda was abducting Rwandan nationals and that Uganda was supporting anti-Kagame rebels. Then in May, you had Uganda saying that Rwandan soldiers had entered its territory and killed 2 men. You also had Museveni admitting that he'd met anti-Kagame rebels, but he said he wasn't supporting them. And then you had Ugandan officials saying that Rwandans in Uganda were actually spies. And it must be said that all these tensions were exacerbated by the fact that these two countries are led by authoritarian rulers who are regularly accused of human rights violations by NGOs, and both rulers have been in power for a very long time. Museveni for 33 years and Kagame for 25 years, 6 years as vice president and now 19 years as president.
Now, those two men actually have a very long history. They haven't always been adversaries.
Not at all. Paul Kagame, when he was very young, his family had to flee Rwanda for Uganda, like thousands of other Tutsis who were being persecuted by Hutus. And in Uganda, he became a rebel soldier who helped Museveni seize power in 1986. And to show you how close they were, Museveni then named him head of military intelligence within the Ugandan army. Then Museveni also helped him take power in Rwanda after the 1994 genocide. They were also allies when they supported the Congolese rebel who toppled Mobutu in 1997. Things started to change after the Second Congo War in 1998. That's when you had Rwandan soldiers fighting Ugandan soldiers on Congolese territory. The reason was that there was a dispute for Congolese natural resources like diamonds. It was also because Museveni was trying to please his electorate and limit the influence of Rwandan soldiers in the Ugandan army. And so there were very bloody clashes. Hundreds of Congolese civilians were killed. So if you go to a big town like Kisangani, where most of the clashes were today, you'll see a lot of resentment from the Congolese towards Rwandans and Ugandans. And that's why today a lot of Congolese were happy to see this pact being signed. They were afraid that these tensions would boil once over again into Congo. So they're happy, but they're also waiting to see if this pact will be fully implemented.
Any unjustified display of South Africa's apartheid-era national flag now amounts to hate speech and harassment. That following a landmark ruling in a Johannesburg court. The decision follows a petition by the Nelson Mandela Foundation after the flag was displayed 2 years ago by white South Africans protesting a spate of murders of white farmers. A potent symbol of white minority rule, the flag can now only be shown if it's in the public interest to do so. Back in October 2016, a catastrophic train derailment in Isaka, Cameroon, claimed 79 lives. A further 550 people were injured. Earlier this year, the government announced a compensation scheme for survivors worth around €1.5 million. But many victims are furious at what they believe are insultingly small payouts. Our team in Cameroon sent us this report.
Since surviving the train derailment in October 2016, Andre can hardly move without crutches. He comes to this clinic in Yaoundé every week to receive treatments for his injured back. Only 600,000 francs CFA, about €1,000 from the 1 billion francs presidential aid package has been given him.
I was seriously injured, so I thought I would get about 5 million francs CFA. When I got the check, I wanted to throw it in their face. When I think about all the expenses for transportation and everything, it's simply not enough.
Survivors of the catastrophic train derailment are still bitter. Kamrai, a subsidiary of the Bolloré Group, was quickly sentenced by Cameroonian courts for the accident. This local artist is a survivor of the train derailment. Like the 744 other victims, he is still in shock after receiving a check from the government.
I was shocked because I didn't think the president would give 79,300 francs to someone who almost lost his life in an accident. After all the stress and expense, for us to end up with this minimal sum, I think it's very humiliating.
Where did the 1 billion francs go? Newspapers in Cameroon have been reporting on the issue, which could once again raise eyebrows over corruption scandals in the country. Jean-Solaire Kwete is a journalist and leader of a union of victims of the derailment. He has called for an investigation into the commission that led the distribution of the compensation money.
We will try to seek help from the relevant institutions so that they can look into the Commission's distribution methods. We need to understand clearly how the compensation is made.
Almost 3 years later, Camrai is still in the process of paying up victims of the most catastrophic train accident in the history of Cameroon.
The prospect of being able to declare Africa free of wild polio looks closer than ever as Nigeria celebrates 3 years with no new cases of the disease. Africa's last case of wild polio was recorded in Nigeria's Borno state back in August 2016. But the World Health Organization will only give the country and, by extension, the continent, a clean bill of health once it's convinced enough measures are in place to prevent any future outbreak. Well, that's all we have time for right now. Thank you very much for watching. There's more news coming up in just a few minutes' time here on France 24. Do stay tuned if you can.